Hello everyone, today I bring you a very interesting manhwa. I hope you like it. Now let's go to the video. Port City Lith. Seagulls fly around the great vessel approaching. After docking, a blonde-haired young man disembarks, celebrating for finally arriving at his desired destination. People around, due to the port city, engage in their fish trade. Raymond does not hide his happiness upon reaching the city. A tall, dark-haired young man with white hair and a cheerful smile notices his friend's joy. That tall young man is Walker, who grabs Raymond by the neck. Two other people are also happy to have arrived in the city. This port city is where they will begin their adventures, which is why they are so excited. This is the age of adventure, where adventurers from all over the world create their own journeys and become the heroes of their own tales. One day, a mysterious portal appeared across the world. Inside, there were all kinds of horrifying monsters that did not exist in the world of Ars. Countless adventurers perished in the portals. However, the unimaginably valuable and powerful artifacts found inside made adventurers dream of obtaining them. Walker is seen saying he wants bait. His friends are surprised, but Walker explains that they cannot enter the portal, nor can they have a plan without knowing what lies inside. Countless adventurers have died due to unforeseen variables. That is why they need a slave to act as bait. The woman in their group agrees as well. Walker arrives at the slave market and is greeted by the merchant. Smiling, the merchant shows Walker the slaves. After hearing Walker's specifications, the merchant recommends a young slave boy. However, Walker says he wants both boys who were there. The merchant wishes him good luck on his adventures. Soon, they set off for their first adventure. In front of a portal, Walker, holding his blade, says he will mark a tree to show that they are inside. As he marks the tree, Walker states that this means they are the first. Upon passing through the portal for the first time, each one experiences a different sensation. After taking a better look around, they are awestruck by what they see. Enormous mushrooms and towering trees. They are stunned by the sight. Walker tells the slaves not to be nervous. Upon entering the portal, there are no monsters in the immediate vicinity, so they are safe for now. However, they cannot return through the same portal they entered. After walking a little further, the girl in black clothing is suddenly attacked by a monster with large fangs. Due to her inexperience and being caught off guard, she ends up getting struck by the monster. Everyone is put on high alert, as they had not noticed the monster until it attacked. Raymond shouts because Charlotte has been hit. What they did not expect happens. They are surrounded by hundreds of monsters. Walker, unfazed, quickly grabs his bow and uses his fire ability against the monster that attacked Charlotte, causing it to fall to the ground. He immediately orders the others to tie the bait to the trees so they can escape. The slaves beg for their lives, but the group, already decided, threatens them and forcibly ties them to the trees. As he runs, Raymond feels guilty. However, in a life-or-death situation, even the kind-hearted become selfish. Walker's group flees while the bait is left behind. The slaves, abandoned, attempt to defend themselves with the weapons they were given. However, due to the overwhelming number of monsters and their lack of skill, the inevitable occurs. Walker and his group flee with Charlotte, who is unable to walk. The chubby member, noticing that Raymond is losing control, grabs him and shakes him, trying to snap him out of it. He shouts that they only failed once and that they can try again. Confident, the chubby one shouts that they will make it out alive. However, one of the monsters has followed them and lands a direct hit on him. With a single blow, the monster crushes him to the ground. Walker drops Charlotte and once again draws his fire bow. But the monster, from a different category and much faster, uses its tongue to wrap around Walker's neck. With tremendous force, it drags Walker into its mouth, cutting him in half with its massive fangs. Now, only Raymond remains alive, desperately crawling for his life. He has no strength in his legs due to the sheer terror he is feeling. The monster tore off Raymond's leg, and even while crying and in great pain, he continued crawling for his life, until he reached the tree where the slaves had been tied, and there he encountered one of them. He was left surprised, seeing the slave safe atop the tree. Raymond screamed for his help while explaining that everyone else had died and that only the two of them remained. As he spoke of how sorry he was for what he had done before, and that he couldn't get out of there alone. While begging the slave for help, Raymond noticed that he was only staring at him furiously. Guys, I took a break from the manhwa to say that if you like the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, but 90% of those who watch the video don't subscribe, so I'm counting on your help. Now let's go back to the manhwa. Raymond cursed at him and ordered him to help instead of just standing there. The slave smiled, and from atop the tree, he jumped. After landing, the slave lamented and said that, unfortunately, Raymond had arrived too late. We then see Raymond being devoured by the monster that had been chasing him. But before being swallowed, at the height of his madness, Raymond still had the strength to laugh and say that the monster would never be able to get out of there. After devouring Raymond, the monster roared with laughter at the despair of the group he had slaughtered. And then it leaped toward the slave to kill him. The slave, who remained standing still, declared that he would not die, and with the spear in his hand, he struck the monster. With a single blow, he opened a massive hole in its belly, large enough for him to pass through. Chaos was erupting across the world, volcanoes in full activity. Hundreds of thousands of monsters soared through the sky, of all sizes and strengths, immense dragons, even the king of dragons himself, with his 3 heads and colossal size. On the peak of the mountain, a group stood. A young woman approached and commented that perhaps the centaur leader had fallen. There was nothing left they could rely on now. The knights, the resistance, the hunters, and all the adventurers, even the 6 heroes whom the people saw as their last hope, were all dead. Looking at the black-haired young man before her, the girl said that he was the only one left, the last adventurer. Taking command, he called them for their final adventure against the winged monsters. The forest was ablaze due to the Dragon King's breath, and as the last adventurer, in the end, after the great battle, only he remained, on his knees, facing one of the Dragon King's immense heads on the ground, which he had cut off. Looking up at the sky, the Dragon King still flew, missing one of his heads. He wondered if it was over for him. And to make matters worse, the severed head began regenerating on the dragon's body, making him question whether all the suffering had been in vain. The dragon soared in the sky as it regenerated. On the ground, he lowered his head, seemingly accepting his fate. As a fearless adventurer, he was ready to die. But at the last moment, he struck the ground, filled with indignation, gritting his teeth in frustration over how everything was going to end. He remembered the sacrifices of his comrades, each one of them, Philip, Jade, Alexis, all sacrificing themselves. On the ground, he screamed, refusing to accept this fate against the immense Dragon King in the sky. Against the dragon, he raised his hand and prepared a powerful spell. However, due to his injuries and the immense power of the spell he intended to unleash, his body couldn't withstand it. The magic dissipated and rebounded against him, causing him to immediately spit blood. But the dragon, now in better condition, prepared a devastating attack and launched it against him, leaving him with no way to defend himself. Losing his life in the darkness, questions lingered in his soul. He refused to accept his fate and begged for just one more chance, until suddenly, his darkened vision turned bright, making him wonder what was happening. He looked at every corner, searching for the dragon, while wondering if he was really alive. He realized he was in the slave market, but he thought better and remembered that the slave market had been abolished a long time ago, and looking at the merchant a little better, he remembered that this was a merchant who had been in charge of him a few years ago, when he was still a slave, making him realize that he was back in the past. He stared at the merchant, who, annoyed, landed a blow on his face, but he only looked as he was in shock from having returned to the past after receiving the blow, and thinking more about his situation and digesting it better until the moment Walk and Raymond and their group searched for slaves and chose him and one more. But this time he was seeing it as his new chance. After everything that happened with Walka's group, he picked up a flame staff from the ground that their group had left. He kept it as it was a good high-level item for him, but he felt it was not enough and searched more. until he saw that one of their legs was loose, making him remember that adventurers keep valuable things in their boots. And indeed, he found a ring after removing the leg and checking the boot. While distracted, he was surrounded by several monsters. Due to the strong smell of blood, he quickly prepared for battle and began fighting with his spear. One of the monsters grabbed the spear with its tongue and broke it in half. Distracted, one of the monsters was about to bite him, but grabbing the staff he had taken from Waka's group, he fired fire magic at the monster. With great skill, he quickly killed all those around him, but due to his lack of skill at the moment, he could not maintain it for long. But he did not care much, because more monsters appeared, making him prepare for another fight. His fire arrows no longer had an effect against these monsters, making him realize that his staff had weakened after using its magic, forcing him to strike the monsters with the staff as he had no other alternative, until the staff recovered and he prepared another fire magic attack against them, which killed the remaining monsters. Charlotte, on the ground, the last one still with strength left, asked if he was not a slave. The protagonist was shocked that she was still alive. On the ground, Charlotte wondered who he really was. Looking at the protagonist, Charlotte asked why he had that staff, making her wonder if all of that was part of his plan. The protagonist asked if she was done talking. He said he felt sorry after what happened to her team, and said that it was something that would not have been different, whether he had planned it or not. Either way, they would all die. Charlotte said he was talking nonsense, but soon the protagonist began to use his magic, making Charlotte realize what awaited her. The protagonist said that it was what they deserved. People who use slaves as bait. After a while, everyone in the port city was shocked after only one slave returned from the portal on his own. The protagonist began to devise a plan, and as a first step, he wanted to be free. Rumors spread through the city about the slave who returned alone from a portal alive. A young man was giving this same report to his superior, and commented that it was strange for bait to return alive alone from a portal. The Lord receiving the report also commented that it was strange. The people who became slaves due to debts ended up becoming bait so that others could return alive. Despite this, even if they returned alive, they were fully aware that they could not easily escape their influence, because the only way to escape was through death. This was the way of the mercantile union. He asked the young man why he needed to be informed about something so trivial. The young man says he has another event to report, and comments that this same slave has freed himself and is now a circle, leaving him shocked. He comments that the slave who was bait is now a first circle, you say. He thinks that a slave always holds a grudge against the mercantile union. The young man says, beyond that, he requested a contract change. He says that he requested a registration as an adventurer. He is shocked. How dare he not know his place? The young man says that Lord Rakan ordered an investigation into this matter, leaving the old man from the Alliance surprised after hearing the name Rakan. He is an executive of the Merchants Union and is showing interest in a humble slave. He reflects after a slave wants to be an adventurer under the Queen of Signs. The status of slaves will no longer exist. This is nothing more than superficial talk. Humans have always been slaves to money. If they cannot pay what they borrowed, they compensate with work. This idea was created by the so-called slaves of the world of Ark. On the day the protagonist's family went bankrupt, it brought an illness with it. The protagonist became a slave. Black moss. The grass he used to obtain credit in the Merchants Union. The Merchants Union set the price of black moss at several times its current price at 1,000 coins. Palm, the protagonist's name, the judge said, the accused, who did not repay the amount of 1 million months on the due date, forcing him to perform work equivalent to that amount for the mercantile union. Then, he was exploited for 6 whole years under the syndicate. Now it is time for revenge for the protagonist. Before his owner, the protagonist identified himself to him. The protagonist remembers the name of the young man. The left hand of Rakan, a good pawn, Abyss, his name. He asks the protagonist if he wishes to modify the contract and says he received a report about him. Then he says he will get straight to the point and comments that he will modify his contract to become an F-rank adventurer for a year. The protagonist thinks that he accepted too easily, but the protagonist thanks him, but realizes that he is just being cautious. Then he says he wants to be rank E, to Abyss, While thinking he does not want to play the game at his pace, Abbas is surprised that he asks for rank E and says that he has not even enlisted in the association to have a designated rank. The protagonist says he has explored more than hundreds of portals for 3 years as bait slave. This brings experience as bait. He was never caught by a monster. Abbas asks when hunting monsters became a virtue for adventurers. The protagonist says that the reason why the first adventurer could make his name was survival. He explains that the virtue of an adventurer is returning alive. Abbas says that he is right and says he certainly has a reason for surviving as a bait slave for 3 years, making him not a simple person, but all bait slaves do is enter low-level dungeons. He asks if he really believes in the pathetic survival skill he has, and if it will work in higher-rank portals. He takes a cigar and concludes that it seems he thinks they are idiots for offering a risky contract to someone who will die and not even generate financial return. He thinks he is just a lunatic. The protagonist only observes while thinking he feels a repulsive sensation. Abbas says that at the door of that portal, it says that only 5 were recommended to enter, and there were 12 scars on the tree. So they were a group of at least 12 people who are buried there, which proves if Palm says he is who he is, he will do as he says, and hands an aluminum paper to the protagonist. The protagonist is assigned a mission and meets a small group that calls him a rookie. The likely leader, a dark-skinned man with blonde hair, introduces himself and says he is a tank, and says he knows the protagonist through Lord Abbas, and remembers that he was a slave, but says that this will not be a problem. He says that the same thing he said also applies to his comrades. The protagonist says he hopes they do a good job together. Another young man with white hair, reminiscent of Walka, says he heard that he wields fire magic. The protagonist says yes. The white-haired young man says that this hesitant yes of his might be because he has not decided on his element. The blonde-haired tank explains that it makes no sense. He heard that mages have their element defined at birth. Thus, apparently, any object not related to their element becomes useless to them. Then he says it is better to stop talking and focus on the mission, which is hunting monsters and retrieving the desired objects of the 12 groups that were annihilated before them. The blonde says that soon they have to return the articles they recover to the Union. He heard that they are giving 3,000 mesos for each article. The young man, yawning and disappointed, says that it is too little. Objects for First Circle adventurers cost 7,000 mesos. That means it is not even half the price. Soon, they stop talking altogether and go on the mission. They enter the forest, which exudes a strange sensation. The blonde orders everyone to pay attention because they are in a forest. Sometimes it is impossible to know where an attack might come from. One of the extras gives an idea to Chev to climb the trees, and after, with all the leaves, hide and move to another tree. It will be easier. He agrees, and soon everyone gathers the necessary equipment to climb the tree. The white-haired young man approaches the protagonist and says that he can rest, as establishing a base is his specialty. Sometime later, in the chosen tree, they build a small base in the tree. Chev orders them to split up and look around. He tells 3 of them to form a group among themselves, while he stays with the protagonist, heading in another direction. Chev wonders how they have not encountered a single monster, much less found an object. Maybe they should go deeper into the forest the next day. Setting the matter aside, Chev asks the protagonist how his first mission was. Suddenly, the protagonist comments that he feels nervous. Chev laughs and says that it is normal. He mentions that he has been an adventurer for a long time, and every time he enters a portal, he still feels nervous. But despite that, he says he feels courage because he has good people by his side. Praising them might seem strange, but they are truly good people. He says he feels pity after hearing the protagonist's story. Slave bait. He could not imagine how hard it must be to be that. Calling him by name, Chev invites the protagonist to become one of them. However, suddenly Chev stops, as the protagonist was a bit distant from him, and he says that he was not being serious. he should not worry about that. Sometime later, at dusk, everyone gathers under the base for dinner. Some light-hearted conversations take place, while the protagonist remains silent. Later at night, suddenly, Chev, along with his group, holds a torch and approaches where the protagonist was supposedly sleeping. Chev calls for him, but there is no response from the protagonist, who was supposedly under the blanket. Until, losing patience, Max, the young man who resembles Walka with his dagger, asks if he might be lost in his dreams. They plan to assassinate the protagonist to steal his fire staff. They even mention that he did not respond due to the strong sedative they put in his food. Max prepares to kill him cowardly while he sleeps with his dagger. He stabs, but the dagger seems to hit something hard, and after pulling off the blanket, he finds a log, leaving them shocked that he was not there. Chev immediately orders them to find him at once. He could not have gone far. However, in that tree where they were, the protagonist casts fire magic, setting it ablaze. While they are still up there, they wonder how it suddenly caught fire. Chev questions whether it might be the work of Palm. One of them, paralyzed, looking up, tells his boss to take a look. Chev, furious, asks what it could be until suddenly he realizes the immense monster that the flames attracted, making Chev curse the protagonist with immense hatred for using them as bait. The gigantic monster bites the tree they were on, but they manage to escape from the tree and start running away. The protagonist finds it pitiful that they tried to deceive him. They keep running, but the gigantic monster continues chasing them. Chev explains that it is a rare monster that appears in purple portals. He says that the monster's body is full of acid. If any adventurer fights it in close combat, the worst could happen. The monster, suddenly realizing that it would not reach them, suddenly fires acid at them. But Chev manages to save his friend by dodging the attack, leaving them surprised that it still has long-range attacks. The boss monster gives them no rest and resumes chasing them. Chev explains that after it fires the acid arrow, it must remain calm for 1 minute. They need to recover and find an opportunity in that time. They need to destroy the core on the creature's head. But confident with the information, Max comments that then it must still be on cooldown after using the acid arrow and sprints toward the creature. Confident, he leaps to face the creature head-on. Chev shouts for Max to wait, as they should attack together. However, the creature should still have 10 seconds left of waiting time. However, the creature attacks again, cutting Max in half with tremendous ease, leaving Chev shocked by what he saw. But the creature, without caring, attacks them with a powerful acid attack, hitting everyone at once, dissolving them down to the bones. Behind a tree, the protagonist observes the battle and thinks that Chev's words were not mistaken. A golden slime eats objects and becomes stronger as a result, however. The waiting time decreases as it gets stronger, and the abnormal size of this slime makes the cooldown of the acid arrow almost non-existent. Now he says he understands why every group that came before did not return. This creature is out of its class. This creature is so large that it can be classified as a yellow gate that sits above the purple portal, making it impossible for First Circle adventurers to face. He is certain that no objects remained in this dungeon, making this mission a failure. But he remembers that Abyss gave this mission to him to prove his worth. So he decides to take another approach and conjures a powerful fire attack against the giant slime, which, after being hit, is deformed, but that is due to its gooey and soft body. Even with the powerful strike, it has strong magical resistance that protects it from direct attacks on its core. Seeing that a single shot will not be enough, he realizes he will need at least 5 shots against its core. The slime recovers and fires an acid arrow in the direction of the protagonist, who, from atop the tree, demonstrates great confidence. He dodges while, with a blade tied to the end of his rope, he jumps from branch to branch, dodging the creature, showing tremendous dexterity, while thinking that a mage would never dream of doing this. However, in his past life, he held the title of the best telekinetic. Still in the air, he arms his fire arrow against the slime. But after being hit, the slime counterattacks as well. However, The protagonist dodges and says only 4 more strikes remain. Swinging on the rope, the protagonist prepares another attack after dodging, and does this 3 more times until the slime's core becomes exposed, giving him the opportunity to break the core and kill the slime. While rushing to finish off the slime with its last strength, the slime also prepares an attack, but the protagonist, with the blade on the rope, pulls himself with his telekinesis to save himself from the slime's strike. From a distance, once again, the protagonist launches another fire attack against the slime, but this time, the attack pierces through the slime's magical defense, which was already damaged, and destroys the slime's core, making it swell until it explodes, causing a massive acid explosion. The protagonist, once again using his telekinesis, throws himself against one of the trees and pulls himself away to escape from the acid wave that sweeps through the forest. After a while, the protagonist returns to the forest floor and picks up a red core that was glowing on the ground. Soon after returning from the mission, in Abbas's meeting room, he is suspicious and questions why, once again, he returned alone and without the objects he was entrusted to bring. The protagonist says that he incorporated novice hunters into his team, who did nothing but try to steal from him. As a result, he left the group, and unfortunately, they encountered a boss and all died. Abbas still remains suspicious and asks if it was just one monster. The protagonist says it was a golden slime. Abbas is surprised and says that if that was really the case, then everyone inside should have, but the protagonist cuts him off and says yes. They were all melted. Abbas becomes furious, thinking that all the Syndicate's artifacts were annihilated and destroyed, causing an unimaginable loss for them. But he thinks the real problem is figuring out how the protagonist survived all of it. There are some common rules regarding the gates. The first is that the number of people allowed to enter is limited. Only the number of people marked on the gate's pillars can enter, and after that, the gate is deactivated as long as all the monsters inside are annihilated. Secondly, there are entrance limitations based on the gate's difficulty level and the circle level. The difficulty level of the gate is known through its color, and those who have circles greater than the gate's difficulty cannot enter. And thirdly, there is only one chance to invade the gate. This is the biggest obstacle of the gates. If someone enters, survives, and leaves, that gate will be destroyed and it will no longer be possible to enter. So, as long as the adventurers who entered the gate are not dead, there will be no other chance, Abbas thinks. So the gate is already a lost cause? It is normal for a golden slime to be too much for first circles to handle, I see. So only you barely managed to survive. And since, as you said, all the items melted, I understand why you couldn't recover them. However, regardless of the reason, it was a failure. Before he could finish, the protagonist cuts him off, saying that he is too impatient and does not let him complete the explanation. And removing the wristband from his forearm, the protagonist says slowly while taking it off that the golden slime, he ate the slime, and shows his forearm with the second circle, leaving Abbas shocked. Shouting, Abbas asks if he absorbed the mana stone that came out of the golden slime. The protection says he believes this is enough to prove his worth, and as promised, he asks Abbas for rank E. But Abbas's sudden reaction is surprising. Suddenly he shouts rank D, which is better than the protagonist expected, leaving him surprised. Before he could comment on anything, Abbas explains that if he works for him, he will receive the same treatment as a rank C. Abbas thinks that giving someone who has not even been an adventurer a rank C suddenly would be considered too much. The adventurer ranks are strongly influenced by the circles. The circles signify power. The difference in grade is clear. However, he feels that the protagonist is not normal. You cannot make a circle using only a mana stone, recognizing the supposed survival instinct he mentioned. He gets excited about him, someone who has just turned first circle, turning second circle, an incredible growth speed. The protagonist quickly realizes that the treatment changed rapidly, but he thinks this is good, as there is not much time left for the first portal of 100 people. The great event that all the guilds and merchant syndicates of Lithport were watching occurred at this time. Obviously, the merchant union is also interested. The protagonist signs the contract and prepares to move forward with the plan. Soon, he tells Abyss that he has a favor to ask. Abyss asks what it would be. The protagonist, with the most shameless face in the world, asks to borrow money. Abyss is surprised and thinks he is a bold bastard. Some say that the portal began in the Age of Adventurers, and everything was planned by the Black Mage. Many adventurers died in the portals, ending the potential future of the world Arcel and the last day that came after. All the monsters that were waiting for their moment came through the portals, and they lost. Exactly within 3 years, the fate that the world of Arcel will face is not written. After the meeting with Abyss, the protagonist walks, while thinking that it is not enough to start. The 100-member portal found will be purple level. Only those with up to 2 circles can enter. Normally, the merchant union will only select adventurers with higher circles. The reason they are investing in a second circle like me is because the Gaffor Syndicate is targeting that door. Although he has obtained money, spending it all on items would be stupidity. The objects that fit his level would be too expensive. He needs to think of something useful to buy with this money. A local merchant expresses his gratitude to the protagonist for visiting his slave shop. The merchant asks what characteristics he desires in a companion and shows him a strong fighter. The protagonist shakes his head negatively and says he has someone in mind and asks to be shown the way. The merchant takes him to the punishment room, where they punish those who do not behave. He asks what the person he is looking for would be like, until they stop at a cell, and the merchant, a little surprised, asks if it is really who he is looking for. There stands a person completely chained. The slave stares at the protagonist. While looking at him, the protagonist thinks he is the one he was searching for. Before he returned, there was an incident in which the death of a person accelerated the end of the world Arkel. Hero of weapons, Aaron, that girl was murdered, and the first and last student of Aaron was the person who triggered the beginning of the end. Hero killer, Debo, this person. Debo asks if by any chance he came there for him. While looking at the protagonist, Debo does not recognize him. The merchant apologizes to the protagonist for the slave's attitude. The protagonist thinks, although his behavior may have been different before his return, he is now just a slave, treating adventurers with this behavior even as slaves. How rude. The merchant says there is no one crazier than him. The protagonist, smiling, thinks that he has a strong personality, but not only the personality, but also the skills. Along with the protagonist, he was one of the few who caught his attention after the last day. Many times we were compared. We are from the same region, we wake up more or less at the same time, and we have similar skills. The protagonist asks how much he costs, while Debo mockingly calls him a family master and stays, asking if he could pay the amount he asks for, and says 1 million mesos. The protagonist thinks it was the fact that both he and I were in extreme need of money. He had a little sister who had the black blood disease. Debo called him a penniless loser, but from his pocket, the protagonist takes out 1 million mesos, making Debo's and the merchant's eyes shine, unable to believe it. The protagonist tells him to wait and listen to what he has to say, while saying that his contracts are for 1 year and his benefits are from 7 to 3. I will have priority in selecting items that drop from the door. The merchant, shocked by the contract, thinks he is trying to make a contract as a group member instead of a slave. The protagonist raises the leaflet and hands him the contract, which he quickly grabs and shouts that there is no turning back. Quickly, he bites his finger and shouts that it is a signed contract, putting his blood as a signature. He thinks that maybe it is because his sister's life is at stake. The protagonist gives a slight smirk, then says that the contract is sealed. They will go straight to a portal, but with a serious look, the protagonist tells him to show his worth. Debo comments that he will work in a way he has never done before. They go to the portal, and Debo thanks him for buying him a weapon, but he says he does not use the type he bought, instead preferring broad sabers, and maybe they should go back and exchange it. But the protagonist comments that from now on, he will work with him, with this weapon. If he does not like it, they can simply terminate the contract. Debo accepts, but asks which door he wants to use as a test. The protagonist says a purple level 1 with a scar. With limits for 8 people, the right place. Debo looks around and asks where the rest of the group is, and since the prota is the boss with a big pocket, finding a good team is not the problem. He comments that it would be good with fur, a healer too, but the protagonist just stares at him until he finally realizes. The protagonist says there is no need to worry about the members. Debo thinks that what he assumed was a mistake, making him sigh and say it is a relief. However, the protagonist completes the sentence by saying that it is only him. Leaving Debo speechless until he shouts in disbelief, however, the protagonist kicks him towards the portal while saying he has no more time. They enter the portal, and Debo shouts, asking if maybe he is crazy to enter a portal with only 2 people, if maybe he is crazy, or if this is a joke. He also says he is being forced to use a weapon he is not used to. However, due to the loud screams he was making, he ends up attracting some trunk monsters in their direction. Quickly, Debo regains his composure and grabs his axe. But with his staff, the protagonist takes the lead, leaving Debo surprised. However, the protagonist, with his fire arrow, uses it against the trunks, piercing through several at once. After killing them, turning to Debo, the protagonist comments that it is disappointing to think he would act this way after entering a portal, and orders him not to make such mistakes again, making Debo speechless as he wonders who the protagonist is. Outside the protagonist's portal, a kneeling woman says that the merchants, they took the bait, and says, "We are still working on the planned schedule, but we have already chosen the people we will send," and she questions if they have his permission to proceed. The man with his wine glass and white hair says, "Everything will be done according to that person's will," and proclaims freedom for the world of Arkel. Debo gathers the mana stones and says he has a total of 27 of them. The protagonist tells them to move forward. Debo thinks that he thought he was just a bastard, but it was no joke. He is surprised by the telekinesis and has never heard of fire arrows with telekinesis. He gets more excited about being with a talented person, thinking he could make a lot of money. He feels happy because he will have money to spend on maintenance and medical expenses, but the protagonist kills the mood by saying that it will be split 7-3. Another group of trunk monsters appears. Debo says there are about 9. The protagonist says it is a perfect number. Debo is surprised that he calls it perfect. Soon, Debo attacks the trunks, and with his axe, he splits one of them in 2, while thinking that he will fight them alone and with a weapon he has never used before, making him cautious. They begin to fight while the protagonist observes Debo's fight from afar and analyzes. From a distance, he thinks, he said he only used swords, which is obvious from how clumsily he moves. But soon, he will realize that Asta's weapon is the one that will make him stronger. There is no need to doubt his talent, being the only person chosen by the hero of Aston Aron's weapon as his student. As time passes and Debo continues fighting, he begins to notice that wielding the great axe becomes increasingly satisfying, feeling even better than using a blade. Each time, Debo shows he is getting more accustomed. The protagonist, observing, thinks he got the hang of it pretty quickly. He hasn't even awakened a circle yet, but he's already good. While fighting, Debo feels the ground tremble, making him wonder if it was an earthquake. However, it was actually a gigantic creature emerging from within the great cliff. Quickly, the protagonist moves forward, pushes Debo back, and takes the lead. As he prepares to use his magic, the protagonist states that its size has nothing to do with its magic, and in any case, it would only be easier to strike it. While using his arrow against the gigantic monster, Debo cheers, saying that maybe magic will work, but with one of its branches, the tree blocks the fire arrow. The protagonist is surprised, as its reaction is quite fast, and he did not expect that, but he does not give up. He prepares another fire attack, this time using telekinesis, changing the trajectory toward the tree's back. However, even with the surprise attack, the tree manages to block it, leaving the protagonist astonished. Debo tells them to run. The magic attack is not working. While dodging the tree's strikes, the protagonist thinks that it's not that his attacks don't work. It wouldn't have blocked them if that were the case. The problem is the branches. The tree lands a powerful blow where they were, and with the tremor of the earth, they are thrown into the air. Seeing an opening, the tree prepares to strike them mid-air. The protagonist uses his telekinesis, placing a piece of stone that had been torn from the ground to prevent them from being exposed. But even so, the tree strikes the stone, yet they avoid the worst. Debo thanks the protagonist. The protagonist tells him to take care of the smaller trunks while he will handle the big one, then rushes forward to face the giant trunk. He launches his fire arrow once again. Debo thinks that this monster is not something they could defeat without a plan. He considers that maybe they need to run, but he is even more surprised when one of the blows lands on the giant trunk's face. While fighting, the protagonist thinks that the branches move too fast, making it impossible to use telekinesis to find an opening. However, he finds another alternative. With the second circle, he can cast twice. He is using an alternative method of firing one arrow after another, as it is unable to block 2 consecutive attacks. Debo is astonished by the protagonist's strength. He is cornering the monster. However, in the brief moment he got distracted, the monsters he was dealing with escaped. Debo quickly shouts for him to be careful. But even with the smaller trunks attacking from behind, the protagonist manages to use his arrow with telekinesis and take them all out at once. The protagonist asks his partner if he can handle his share. The giant trunk attacks the protagonist again. He manages to dodge, but in the air, he is left open. The trunk strikes, and when it is about to hit him, Debo swiftly moves ahead of the protagonist and lands a blow on the branch that was about to strike him, defending him. After landing, Debo comments that he just saved him and asks him to take back the blame he placed on him for the smaller trunks. Smiling, the protagonist remarks that, in the end, he seems useful, then summons his mana while telling them to go together. Together, with Debo in front and the protagonist behind using his position as a mage, they attack the tree. With great effort, the two manage to impose their rhythm against the tree, each attacking from one side with great synchronicity. Debo lands multiple blows with his axe, truly wounding the tree, while the protagonist provides support with his fire magic. But in a moment of distraction, and due to Debo's skill limit, he ends up being struck by one of the tree's branches. With telekinesis, the protagonist rescues Debo mid-air. However, the trunk strikes the piece of stone that Debo was standing on. As Debo falls, the protagonist makes more stones levitate and rescues him again mid-air. But the trunk does not pause and keeps breaking every stone Debo steps on, forcing him to jump from stone to stone while falling. Yet, they do not retreat and prepare a simultaneous attack. Debo lands a direct hit on the trunk's eye with his axe, the blow being so powerful that the axe gets stuck in its eye. As it topples over him, he remains underneath. With telekinesis, the protagonist makes the axe levitate and return toward Debo. Debo, now holding his axe again, shouts for it to open its mouth. It's dessert time, and he lands another blow on the other eye of the trunk, which, furious, rises and opens its mouth to devour Debo. But that was exactly what the protagonist wanted. He launches his arrow straight into the trunk's mouth, making it burn from the inside. Next to Debo, the protagonist comments that he did a good job as the gigantic trunk burns before them. In a village, inside a humble house, a girl is giving thanks for her humble meal until someone knocks at the door. She quickly answers, wondering who it could be. But upon opening it, she freezes at the sight of her brother Debo, standing before her. Holding back tears, she embraces him and welcomes him back in a deeply emotional moment. The protagonist was not with Debo at that moment. It was his alone. However, the protagonist also went to visit a small, humble cabin in the middle of the forest. And there, unlike Debo, who smiled at his reunion, the protagonist, seeing the person in the bed, lowers his head. Using his fire magic inside the dusty cabin, he leaves his memories behind, setting the cabin ablaze.